Okay. Noting the time, in the presence of a quorum, I hereby call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. First item of business is public comment. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to make a comment? Welcome. Pick a microphone, any microphone. Please do.
Thank you. My name is Annette Lockery. I'm here to address what I consider outrageous and untrue comments made by David Martin at the last FinCom meeting on April 25th. I kind of find it strange to figure out what made him feel entitled to use his position as a select board liaison to this committee to try and smear my name at a public meeting. And I really can't help but wonder how anyone thinks it's okay to do that to somebody else. So I'm here to address the comments that were made, just to give you folks the truth of what really is going on. I went back and I watched the tape of the meeting again, as hard as that was. The first 13 minutes of his comments were 13 straight minutes of trying to demean me, ethically and morally. And then another 12 minutes where there were comments otherwise, including some also about me personally. So a total of 25 minutes. I'll give you some quotes and then I'll address them. One of the comments, I'll deal with talk time first. One of the comments was that I made tens of thousands of dollars. I double billed. Talk time was not disclosed. I was double paid. The Talk Time program is something I created and ran for 22 years. It started in 1972. It was a reading program and a love of reading program, a library program for little kids. In the morning, I met with 2- and 3-year-olds and their parents or grandparents. And in the afternoon, the 4- and 5-year-olds were dropped off. All of my classes involved getting books out after the program was over. They were 8-week sessions, and each one had a different theme, so the kids could bring something related to the theme. These classes happened only on Mondays when the library was closed. So I was the only one there, and I had a key to get in and set up the room, and again, to lock up when I finished. Again, I had 2 to 3 classes a day, and I had 3 8-week sessions per calendar year. I ran them primarily during the school year. At the end of the day, I checked in all the books that came back, and again, as I said, checked out all the books the kids could carry. Of course, I encouraged taking out as many books as possible. After the first year of Talk Time, there was an increase in the circulation in Citizens Library of 3,140 books, which is a lot. And I'm proud to say that because of Talk Time, enrollment in the library, patronage increased, as did the circulation, which is what Talk Time was all about. So in the very beginning, it was brand new. I had taught a summer program, and they liked it so much they asked me if I would run it during the year. And in the beginning, parents paid per child to attend Talk Time. And the money was collected either by me on the Mondays if they came on the Mondays, or by the people at the desk. And those checks were photocopied, a sheet of paper with each of the checks on it, photocopied, given to the auxiliary, and the auxiliary put them in the bank, and then they paid me. I never, ever would bill somebody. I didn't have to. The arrangement was already there. I was paid by the auxiliary. After a certain point in time, and I don't remember how long it took, but the auxiliary decided that there was enough money in the till to not charge anymore for Talk Time. So there was no more charge for Talk Time, and people came for free, and the auxiliary paid for it. A good deal of the money in the coffers for Talk Time I helped raise. I was always very involved with, fundraising, fairs, book sales, that kind of thing. The number 34,000 was raised. In 16 years, I was paid $34,000. And that came to $2,125 a year. Over that period, dividing 24 Mondays in 3 months. I figured I'd give you guys some numbers because I know you're FinCom. It basically boils down to $11 an hour. And that wasn't bad money. I worked hard for it, and it was a labor of love, but it was nice to be paid for what I was doing. So David Martin's quote was, "I was paid well." I don't know how that relates to the minimum wage at the time or not, but again, I wasn't in it just for the money. It helped pay for my supplies as well as my time. David Martin also said that I made $100,000 in 20 years. Well, the $34,000 for 16 years is correct. I'm not sure where he got the other $66,000 in 4 years, but I don't have any reason to think that's correct. The comment that was made was that the trustees of Citizens Library had a very poor record of controlling money. That's just plain, flat out, not true. They were very, very careful with the money. It was hard-earned. Many of us got down on our hands and knees and dug plants out of the ground to make money for the auxiliary. So it wasn't carelessly spent. Another question that was raised was that I had a conflict of interest, that I was the head of WAVMA. The West Acton Village Merchants Association is an organization in West Acton involving all the different businesses, as many as we can get to join. Over the years, I've been involved for many years, and over the years, we encourage everybody to join. The main purpose of WAVMA is to encourage people to come into West Acton Village, know it's there, do business there, and enjoy it. It's it's the really only town center we have in Acton, and I happen to love it, and people who come and visit love it as well. So that's what WAVMA was all about. In 2021, Citizens Library joined WAVMA, 2021. And yes, I encouraged them to join WAVMA for the visibility. Because visibility, I do marketing and advertising for my job. Visibility makes a difference to how people respond. And by knowing the library's there, people will use it. So I encouraged them to join. I had no official capacity at the time. They did join in 2021, and I became a trustee in August of 2022, more than a year later. I might also add that I became a trustee 3 years after talk time ended. So 3 years after talk time ended is the last time I had any involvement financially with Citizens Library through talk time. Another quote from David Martin was that I went into storage areas without permission, I removed materials from the library, and I went into private staff areas. A couple of months ago, after I became a trustee, I was interested in finding some archival documents that I knew to be in a file cabinet on the second floor. When I was running talk time, I had a lot of my supplies on the second floor. The second floor, if you haven't been to Citizens Library, is a very steep, narrow little stairway. I happen to be very familiar with it because I went up and down for 20 years. I had a house in Vermont with the same kind of stairway. So when I asked if I could go upstairs and look in that file cabinet, I was told that the stairs were unsafe. And I assured them I was familiar with the stairs, and they said, well, it's really a staff area. You can't go there without somebody from Acton Memorial Library. So I called and made an appointment, and 2 weeks later, somebody from Memorial accompanied me to Citizens Library. We went upstairs. I found the archival documents I was looking for. She stood right beside me while I was looking and made copies of the documents I asked for. And we both left with I had the documents she copied for me, and that was all. When I got home, I realized there was some that I had seen that I didn't request a copy of, so the process repeated itself again 2 weeks later when it was convenient for her to join me. I went there with Mary Cadis from Memorial Library, and again, she was kind enough to make the copies. So I never went up there by myself, didn't go into any private storage area, and I went there with an accompanist that was no farther away than my elbow. And part of that was probably the room we were in was small, but we were literally this far away from each other the whole time. So she saw every document I looked at, and again, was nice enough to copy them for me. So the only things I've ever removed from Citizens Library have been books that I've checked out. You know, I had a key to the library for 22 years. And if I was going to steal something, I wasn't going to wait till now to do it. So please know that I would never, ever have gone into the library and taken anything that didn't belong to me. Another comment was that I took pictures of library records. That probably involves a comment that happened when I first became a trustee. The librarian wanted to buy a people counter, which is really hardly necessary for a little place like Citizens, but they wanted one because Memorial had one. So they ended up we gave them $2,000 for a people counter. And what they were also doing is with a pencil count, a little stroke tally. So when I went in there one time, they were, and as a trustee, they were giving us this documentation at our monthly trustee meetings. So I went in there one time and I saw it on the desk, so I just took out my phone and I said, oh, is that the tally? She said, yes. So I took a picture of it. If it wasn't something that I knew I was getting anyway, and I had been privileged to, I wouldn't have done that. But that became a major, I took a picture of a library record. The last one that I wanted to mention, and again, I know I talk fast because I'm very conscious of your time. You guys work really hard with long, boring documents, and you know, I couldn't do it myself. I know, believe me. So I was loath to come and do this tonight, really, because I value your time, but I felt compelled to at least give you a different perspective on what you heard on April 25th. So the last thing is a small one, but again, it's just, the trustees of Citizens Library were portrayed as wanting bottom line control over the budget. Well, anybody that knows anything about towns, and I don't know different towns, but I know Acton, nobody has the authority over anything over the town except the town manager. But what the trustees had wanted, and always did, was to work with the town manager, agree upon a budget, and then make sure that the library functioned within the budget. That's all. Nothing more than that. I mean, to have David portray it that we wanted to take over the budget and run it by ourselves, I'm not sure where that little idea came from, but it was never the truth. So again, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I know I talk fast, partly because I'm a little nervous, but partly because I want to let you guys get on with more important things. But I wanted to tell you that what you were told was lies. I'm a decent, honest, hardworking person, and it matters to me what you, my neighbors, and fellow citizens of Acton think about me. So if there's any questions about anything that needs to be addressed, I'm happy to answer anything you have.
Thank you very much. I don't believe that we'll probably have any questions, but I certainly do appreciate that we could afford you the time to speak for at least as long as you were spoken against.
Well, I could take another 15 minutes if I was going to take that long. Thank you again.
I think we were all fairly pleased with the outcome at town meeting, and I know it's a difficult situation, and I think that the FinCom just hopes that it gets worked out amicably.
I think so too. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Tara from West Acton, here to support Annette. Thank you, Annette, for doing all you do. And some of us sometimes suffer for our public work, and I think Annette handled it very graciously. I just want to point out that if you add up how much she was making an hour and how much the professional folks are making, it's a lot less. And the volunteers were all let go. So we hope that we can find a place where the volunteers will be invited back and we can get back to the regular budget that is a lot less in the order of $20,000 a year. But also make note that Annette raised most of the money that then the trustees decided to pay her. So I thought that was left out of the conversation. Also, I think that Annette might have forgotten when I asked her to go in and take a picture of the Constitution of the Citizens Library Association, which was on the wall, which staff refused to make a copy of. So she had to go in and take a picture. Then she had to go back and take a better picture because I couldn't read it, right? And then you had to get Blake to get it because he was taller, right? Something like that. So I just want to put that in the mix. And then in terms of, the trustees of old, the trustees of the Citizens Library would talk a lot about how to stay in the budget and how to figure out how to get money from other places. Right now, the Acton Memorial Library, in contrast, I don't want to make lots of contrasts, but just so you can appreciate what the trustees did with pennies. The Acton Memorial Library is currently sitting on about $250,000 worth of state aid that has been amassed over the years. I didn't know if you knew about that when AML was coming to ask you for money. And I hope that we can find out how much of that is Citizens Library so that we can actually keep it on the books. So when people who are caring about the budget are looking at the pennies, they know how much is actually theirs. So that's one thing. WAVMA, West Acton Village Merchants Association, Annette took the time to gather up everybody to come. When you pay your annual due, basically that puts you on the map for the village stroll. So if you want to, the fire station, I think, is a member, is that right? And they get on the map so they can have their touch your truck event and people go over to the fire station and do whatever they do over there. I like to touch your truck personally, but, and then I was going to say also that we're having a yard sale, talking about pennies, at 24 Windsor. Some friends of mine are having a yard sale. It's a community yard sale where everybody can come and bring things to sell, and there'll be a free section. And there's actually a klezmer duo scheduled to play and walk around the field, because why? Everybody has a klezmer duo at their yard sale these days, right? So, and then the last thing is land clearing limits. Boxborough passed tree protection ordinance or bylaw last week, so it's very exciting. And I know you're probably going to be hearing about this soon from the DRB folks. They're going to, the DRB folks are going to the planning board tonight, but I think they were very impressed with what Boxborough did. So I think you're going to hear more about that. And my last thing, please ask the select board to include land clearing limits on their top 10 goals for the select board. We're almost there. We got the language, we have precedents, and I hope that you support that for one of the goals. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no more members of the public, we can move along to the Acton Quarterly Report. Welcome.
Thank you. As we have the Q3 quarterly report up on the screen, we will introduce ourselves because you may not recognize us or recognize us in different capacities. So I am Mary Ann Fleckner. I still am the Director of Human Resources, and I am now the Interim Director of Administration, which includes Finance and Human Resources. And to my left is Ellie Anderson, and Ellie is our Financial Solutions Analyst in the Finance Department. And so we are here tonight to present to you the Q3 for the fiscal year, so ending March 31st. I'll just start off with the first couple of slides, which talks about the general fund, the operating fund. And as a reminder too, is that once we present this to you tonight, this will be up on our website like it usually is for every quarter. So that's what that slide tells you. So these next couple of slides are about the general fund, and then I'll hand it over to Ellie, and she'll be talking with you tonight over the 5 enterprise funds that we have. So we're feeling very good going into actually Q4, but again, this is for Q3 ending March 31st. And as you can see, on the far right column, percent collected, we should be at about 75%, 3 quarters through the fiscal year. So for property tax, we're pretty much at 75%. The state aid, and the state aid is the cherry sheet, say that 3 times fast, the funding that we receive from the Commonwealth, and we're a little over the 75%. The Mass School Board Authority is a one-time payment that we do receive. We usually receive it at the beginning of the fiscal year, so that's why we're at 100%. Local receipts, we're very happy about that. You can see that our goal was the 5.5, we're at 5.2, so that's almost 96% of revenues collected. And so to the next slide, right now, again, the Q3 is we budgeted 37,722,544. Actual for expenditures is 29,403,986. So percentage expended has 77.9%, a little over 75%, but the reason for that is that we pay the Middlesex County Retirement Board at the beginning of a year, and if we pay them a certain amount, we get a discount. So that is a chunk of money that's paid at the beginning, hence why you'll see it's a little bit over 75%. So that's actually really good news. It's like a sale. It's a discount that we get for paying in advance. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ellie, and she'll go over the 5 enterprise accounts that we have and that we manage over the next 6 slides.
Okay, so as Mary Ann said, we have enterprise funds and we have 5 of them. The first one is the Septage Enterprise Fund. As you see, the planned revenues and expenses for fiscal year 2023 is $159,900. That includes the usage of $10,000 worth of retained earnings, meaning that the fund needs to raise $149,900 over the fiscal year. At this point in the year, we're at 67.9% collected and just about equal with our expenses at 66.7% collected. Yes.
I'm sorry, it just seems easier to jump in with the enterprise funds, if you don't mind, as we go along.
Yeah, that's okay.
My recollection is that that is not uncommon because this is septic
Yes.
fees, right? And so those are not occurring over the winter. It's a
That's right.
fall, summer, spring
Yeah.
issue. So
Yeah.
it's no concern, right?
That's right. It tracks with previous years. The Board of Health and the Septage Enterprise Fund reaches their busy season in the springtime. On to the transfer station. The budget for the years for revenue and expenses is $643,012. This includes $40,000 in retained earnings. The fund is 91.4% collected and only 58.9% expended. On to sewers. The budget for sewers was $2,308,705. This includes the usage of just under $500,000 in retained earnings. At this point in the year, the fund is 57.9% collected and 59.8% expended. The ambulance enterprise fund budget is $1,590,127. This uses a general fund subsidy of $390,000, and then the rest is from retained earnings. At this point, the fund is 80% collected and 78.1% expended. And then finally, the transportation enterprise fund. The budget is $551,036. Again, transportation utilizes a general fund subsidy of $160,000, and then the rest through retained earnings. At this point, the fund is 19% collected and 57.9% expended.
Is that typical for this fund as well?
So I have some additional information in case there were questions, because we did investigate. So the cutoff point for this report is March 31st. We took a look at April through April 30th, and we found that there was additional revenue that came in April, kind of a backlog of revenue from the billing side on our part. So that money is coming. Yes, so the billing, there's billing in there, there's revenue that's not included in there that came in April. So if that were to be included, the revenue would be $152,834. That includes collections from July to January. And then in April, February, and March's fees were also billed for. So if you include all of that, the fund would be 87.5% collected for the revenues that encapsulate this period of time.
Great. More questions?
Sure. Could we go back to the transfer station?
Yes.
And do you know anything more about this?
I'm sorry?
Do you know anything more about this one?
Well, it depends on what your question is. We'll see if I can answer.
So, the reason I think revenues are high is because the sticker sales are all in the fall, so all the sticker revenue is already in. I'm kind of curious as to why the expenses are lower than 75%, because that would seem to me not to be seasonal. So, do you have the answer to that one?
I'm not 100% sure of the cyclical nature of the fund, this one in particular, where if most of the spending is occurring later in the fiscal year, I'm not really sure. That's something we'd have to look into further.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, down here.
Mr.
Sorry, it was on one of the very first slides. Local receipts were at 91%. What stands out? 96%. What's doing better than normal this year?
So licenses, permits, and fees, which includes a whole lot, including building permits and public nursing. Both of those were coming in pretty strong. Also excise tax. Yes, excise tax was, hold on, I have the exact numbers. Yes, so excise tax, we had planned, in the recap, we had listed just over 3.1 million. So far, we're at 2.7 million. And this does not include the billing of commitment 2, which we believe came in around 500,000. That was billed for in April. So all of that revenue isn't included in here as well. So it should continue to exceed. But the bulk of it is excise and then licenses, permits, and fees.
And as I recall, we can't budget higher than the previous year's
That's right.
excise. But is it safe to say that next year we will be truing up a more accurate view of excise, since the bleed off is more or less linear, since you can tell the age of vehicles as they go?
Yes, when the finance department is completing the tax recap process, an analysis of previous year's actual revenues is considered, and the DOR likes to look at what you planned on last year and what you actually took in, and they do that sort of analysis when they're determining if what you're forecasting for that year to come up with a tax rate is justified. So it will just have to depend on how the revenues actually come in at the close of the year.
Similarly, a couple of years ago, there was a very large local receipts for the permitting of the Insulet building. Are you expecting any similar large windfall's the wrong word, but any similar large receipts as a result of any of the activities that are going on?
Nothing that I can think of or nothing that I'm currently aware of.
Thank you.
So I just want to get clarity. So excise tax is more than just vehicles, but vehicles may be the biggest portion of it, is that right? Automobiles or?
So excise tax is just motor vehicles?
It's just the motor vehicles?
Yes, it is.
So let's say we bring in $1 million in fiscal year '23 in vehicles. So next year, you're not allowed to budget more than $1 million, but you might bring in 1.5, $2 million potentially. Right?
Yeah, so the DOR likes to see that you're being conservative because the revenue that you're forecasting for local receipts is going to have a bearing on the tax rate calculation. So because of that, they want to see that your estimates are conservative and it's something that you can actually reach.
Yeah.
So we like to look at prior years, what actually came in, when determining how much for each of those local receipt line items we're going to predict for the next year. because it is a prediction.
So it looks like for this year we'll be over what was budgeted. Mostly because
Yes.
I bought a new vehicle, and I think Mr. Majors got 3 new Lamborghinis this past year, right?
So both of you contributed.
Okay. Mr. Cole?
Mr. Chairman, I just would like to make one other comment for the committee. The MSBA number, I don't want people to be scared in a year or two when they see that MSBA number go down to next to nothing, because we're coming to the very tail end of the Parker Damon building. Actually, I think the Parker Damon building is done. This is the tail end of the the high school renovation, junior high and high school renovation. So don't be scared, rest of my fellow committee members, when you see that MSBA number go down precipitously to basically zero in the next year or two. It doesn't matter, because that is strictly covering the debt exclusion. So it's a first in, first out for the debt exclusion line items. It has nothing to do with the operating budget. So just be a little careful when you look at this and go that the general fund is healthy, because the MSBA line has nothing to do with it.
Okay, so how should we expect to see that number change with the new Boardwalk School?
We won't see it at all, because the Boardwalk School was taken out strictly by the school district, and therefore will not show up on the municipal accounting in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you. Other questions? No?
Sure.
Yes? Go ahead.
I'll address this one to Mary Ann. Congratulations on your promotion, I think. Is there an update on replacing the financial director?
No. There is, right now, we are concentrating on the principal assessor and also the town accountant, and we're feeling very, very good about that. Just FYI, so my background is, again, most of you see me and know me as a HR person. So I worked for the state before I came to the town for about 21 years, mostly the Department of Public Health. And I was the Director of Administration and Finance there. So my background is finance, and I love human resources. So when I came to Acton, I concentrated on human resources, but my background is finance. I'm hoping that, and we're confident, that after we get a principal assessor and the town accountant and those 2 key positions, that obviously the finance director is key as well, that will follow shortly thereafter. For right now, I'm the interim, and that is it, is that key word interim.
With a capital I.
With a capital I.
So the other gentleman, Tom Moses, is gone.
Yeah, he came, so Tom Moses, he also, before me, was the interim finance director, and he was going to Vietnam on April 19th. And so he told us that, and we knew that he had an end date. So he's somewhere in Vietnam having hopefully a great time and enjoying himself, well-deserved.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. No other questions? Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, our pleasure.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay. We can move on to town meeting discussion and recap. And I will open the floor to whomever has the topic in their head that is most forefront. Ms. Anderson.
I really appreciated that we spoke to more of the articles this year, even if it was just 1 or 2 sentences. In previous years, we had said simply recommend or do not recommend, and I think it was helpful for people to get even just that little bit more of a why we chose the way we did.
I agree. Thank you all for doing that and preparing those statements. And that was something that had been asked for after the previous year, that it would be helpful. So any other thoughts, comments? Mr. Majors.
Yeah, I still have an issue with some of these citizens petitions. Not that their heart is in the right place or they're well-intended, but I think they're very, some of them are kind of inappropriate for town meeting in the sense that they're not fleshed out. They, what you see in your program guide, in your town meeting warrant is maybe 1 or 2 sentences without really an explanation. they're voted on at the last part of the last night of the town meeting when there are 12 people remaining, and it can commit the town to some pretty big financial obligations or even other administrative issues that, like the code of ethics and things of that nature, where, it should be really discussed in a larger forum, but, it just seems like it's always the special interests that pass these warrants at the last moment, when there are no one's there, and it could have some serious unintended consequences for the town. I just think we need to tighten up the rules a little bit and get them fleshed out, and maybe somehow have a pre-screening, and at least raise the bar a little bit instead of the 12 signatures that are needed.
Sorry, no, we're not going to take any more public comment. Thanks.
Yeah.
There's 12? I just think we need to raise the bar a bit and make it clean up our act, and raise the standards. It's got to be a reason for the article and some facts and figures, just like is required for every other warrant. And it's just not fair, the way some of these are passed, that it's like at the late hour with just special interests remaining, and it's the consequences could be pretty serious.
Thank you. Well, to that comment, I would like to add that I continually am frustrated by the turnout for specific articles and then the mass exodus after specific articles. And perhaps as a FinCom, we should make a motion and decide on what we think is the better way to do it, whether we think it should be articles drawn out of a hat at random or, some other methodology. Let's open that discussion up. Who thinks that it should be changed and it should not be a schedule and an agenda and should instead be some other type of either random or at least, so that it's less likely that people can come and then leave right away. Sorry, Mr. Cole.
So this is one of the few times where I can see both sides of the argument. I normally am vehement on one side or the other. I do love the fact that some of the towns in Massachusetts absolutely do put their article numbers into a bingo ball machine and pull out the articles by random number. I think that's brilliant, because then you have to stick around and see what you get done. The problem I see is I remember not that long ago when my kids were little, and one of the two voting members had to disappear at 9 o'clock when the movie was over. And so there was no way to guarantee that you were disenfranchising half the people or half the family voters because somebody had to go home and take care of the kids. So unfortunately, I can see both sides of this. I think it's perfectly reasonable I would like to see us take the 4 largest cost articles first, and then take everything else after that completely random. Now, that may mean that because we spent all the money, we're going to get even less people at the end of those first 4 articles, but that unfortunately is democracy. And at least the most expensive items in town have the most number of people there to vote on it.
Mr. Noon?
Yeah, well, my comment about this town meeting would be that the second night was too long. And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. The rest of my comments will be as the one-time chair of the Town Meeting Improvement Committee from pre-COVID days. And a lot of the feedback we got was quite the opposite of going random, that people wanted more of an agenda, set times when certain articles would be taken up, because some articles are far more important to some people than others. The other thing that we got a lot of feedback on was having an end time. Like, don't take up anything new articles after 10 o'clock at night. We actually, for a while, we had that, this is kind of an unofficial rule, but it's strictly up to the moderator at that point to control the meeting. And as much as I enjoy town meeting, very few people ever want to come back for a third night. So we've kind of gone into a default of we'll go as late as we possibly can on the second night to get the job done. The problem is that, yeah, we had 500 people to start the first night, and what do you think? 60? Not counting the Board of Selectmen, the FinCom, in the House at the end. And to Mike's point, whether they're binding or not binding, 60 people who had the wherewithal to be able to stay there till after midnight doesn't represent the town. It represents 60 people that wanted to stay there, had strong kidneys, or don't sleep well at night. I don't know. But it certainly wasn't representative. So I hear you on the random thing, but people have different goals for town meeting than necessarily we do. And yeah, to get parents there, get two parents there is very difficult. So I don't know how to solve the problem. I had a committee and we worked on it. We did start the alternative location, which I noticed was mostly people wearing masks to keep from getting COVID, whereas the intent of that was the kids could bring their kids and they wouldn't be disrupting the auditorium. I didn't see any kids in there. 16. I don't want to take that one on.
Yeah, I was going to say snarkily and jokingly, well, now your kids can come and vote. But that's just a joke. Mr. Wellinghoff.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points have been made, and I think we have discussed this issue over the years, and as Steve pointed out, there's been committees to this end. I'm just thinking out loud, but, one thing the state does is when they send out their, warrant equivalent, they do have a pro and a con case, or a yes or a no on certain articles. Generally speaking, the warrant is obviously for the article, hence it's in the warrant. I mean, so there's support at the select board, et cetera, and advocates for it. I'm not suggesting the finance committee take an opposing view to issues, but it might be food for thought for town members who do get those warrants in the mail as having something, considering a counter argument. And I'm just, again, spitballing, thinking out loud about this, but a lot of solutions have been tried over the years, and it's even on the best nights, town meeting has 2 to 3% of the town population in it, voting on issues, much less, sometimes well under 1%. And so a lot of the articles that do come up there, there's obviously strong advocacy for them. There's support from, the select board, the warrant committee, et cetera, et cetera. I just think it's constructed to have counter arguments. There's just a little bit of debate on it, and it doesn't have to be everything, and you don't want to extend the night, obviously, but a lot of what does get said at those microphones is redundant, is slightly differing views on these, and a lot of times they're very unfocused. They're, just folks who have, just maybe more of a general opinion about whatever the warrant article is rather than something constructive driving a decision. And there's less of an anchor around a counter thought, and the altering the warrant to put in a counter argument could be an anchor to allow people to think about another option. I'm, again, throwing that out there, and maybe other towns have done it, but I like the way the state does it, is, pro and con. Hey, this is great. Hey, I hate this. And, what are those arguments? And then there's a half a page of each one, and you could say, I agree or I disagree, and or go online and find alternative information. The problem is there's just too much information to digest on 70 articles in a 6-8 hour period. And there's some people could work days and days preparing a counter argument and everything, and they get 2 minutes. And somebody else could just pontificate, a 10,000-foot view about something, and they get 2 minutes. And it's just very unfocused.
Thank you. I'm struggling to make sure I pronounce this correctly since you trained me.
Yes, okay,
Ms. Gangoli.
thank you. Well said. So I am struggling with the low turnout in general at town meeting. And I don't know what one can do about it, short of really changing the way that we do the democratic process in town. So much as I hate to sort of defer my vote, I know some towns and cities in the state have precinct representatives that go to town meeting and advocate for positions or against them, as the case may be. And I don't know that at least then we'd have kind of a representation of most people in town through the precinct representatives, rather than just, the people who are available that can come to town meeting and everyone else who may be really interested and is affected by the warrant articles that are voted on, but really don't have the wherewithal to show up, Particularly sort of poignant to me is the fact that the biggest part of the budget is the school budget, and yet most of the parents can't even make it to town meeting. So, no, most of them, I guarantee most of them do
don't-
not show up to town
They
meeting.
don't need to be there. And you can tell a number of parents come because they leave right after the vote. You see the exodus. When there are school-related articles, you see the exodus right after
Right.
the vote. I was just saying, don't say they're not represented. When it matters, people get there for it.
Well, I don't think you're seeing representation from the entire population of voters, or even anywhere close, not even a majority. I would dare say it's a minority of voters. You can't tell me that the population we had at town meeting, at least the last couple of years that I've been on finance committee, has been anywhere close to representative of the parent population in town. So it's a little bit jarring to me that we don't have the engagement that we need, but it's partially because of the way that town meeting is set up, particularly in this day and age. It's a really archaic system in a very modern world, and I think we need to rethink that.
Thank you. And any other comments on this side?
Well,
Mr.
once
New?
again, from my history of studying town meetings, I can tell you that, yes, Dave, there are towns that actually, the Finance Committee or the Warrant Committee publish their own report, article by article. Not many, but there are. The warrant is the Select Board's warrant, so we're only going to get so much ink, especially if we don't agree with them in their document. But there are committees that do that. As far as attendance goes, there are three issues that will bring out attendance. An operating override, a dog leash law, and marijuana. If any one of those three are on the warrant, we'll get attendance.
Point of order, you forgot trash bags.
4. 500 people for the first night wasn't bad. Usually we get around 400. Who are they? I once did an analysis down about 8 town meetings deep. And people that always show up, there's about 100 people, and their average age is 65. The breakdown of people demographically is pretty much, it's even across precincts, and the age distribution is skewed heavily to over 50. So that's who's making your town rules.
I see lots of hands going up. I'm going to make a comment, which is that, we do get the opportunity, and I know this because I just had it, to write the Finance Committee message in the warrant article. And I used the opportunity to be very short, very sweet, very succinct, and extremely financial. But it's not to say that we couldn't, as a FinCom, use that same publishable space to come up with something like a revised point of view, or a revised point of view along with specific article comments and recommendations. However, this really gets published before a lot of those thoughts are congealed, right? Because we're still having meetings after this has been published. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that we do have an opportunity where we could, as a group, and rather than saying, okay, we'll just let the chair do the message, maybe take it on as an entire finance committee and say, what do we really want that page to say? So, Ms. Anderson.
I love town meeting. I think it is one of the most incredible things you can experience. You walk into a room full of people who you mostly don't know. You become a community who, for one time in the year, actually listen to each other. People will stand up and say an opinion, and you see other people in the room listen and change their mind. From up on stage, it is incredible. You will see whole people sway to an entirely different position. That's not going to happen with anything like a representative town meeting. And it's amazing to me, like you inviting to drive people home at the end of town meeting and saying hi to people in the hallway, just because we had all been there together through that long meeting. It's this sense of community, this really belonging and being part of a group together that we need in so much more of our society. And I would hate to see anything diminish that. If it's only some tiny part of the community who's going out for it, at least they're doing it. Like, I'm so grateful. This is exactly what we want in our democracy. It's so much better than everything helping anywhere else in the country. I would hate to see that get lost.
Wonderful. I'll abuse my position again to interject, which is, I love the idea of getting more representation out of having like districts and representation. But for the same reason that if we wanted to publish, say, our recommendations on this page, by the time people could meet in precincts to tell their representative how they want them to vote, but between the time that happens and the time they come to town meeting to vote, the information's old already, right? Because so much gets discussed at town meeting. I just wanted to throw that in there. Ms. Russell.
Thanks. I just also wanted to add that anybody who's taken any kind of statistics course knows that 50% of the town showing up for a meeting would actually skew the results. It sounds great. It sounds like more is better, but not always. A smaller sample size is often more accurate. I'm not saying that we're getting a good cross-section of the community. I'm also friends with a lot of people all through the time I've been here who don't go to town meeting and can. In fact, the majority of the people I know don't go to town meeting and can. And that doesn't mean everybody has access to town meeting, but once a year to get a babysitter for a couple of nights, people manage that for going out. They manage that for anniversaries and birthdays and weddings and trips and work, and not everybody. I really think it's important to note, some people work during town meeting. Some people cannot get coverage, some people can't afford it, there are all sorts of reasons. But I believe easily 50% of the voting public could come to town meeting, should they so desire to make that a priority in their lives. I'd love to see more representation. I think it's really hard to cut through the noise. Having done fundraising and having worked for the schools and having done auctions, and you'll send flyers in backpacks and you'll put out emails and you'll put out websites and you'll talk about it to all your friends, and somebody will still say, what's going on tomorrow night? Because we all have so much information coming at us. And as long as the town is running the way you want it to, you probably are not going to do any more than grumble about your taxes. If we had a representative government in Acton, the people who go now and are there now, they're going to run for those spots. And they're already there, right? They're the ones who are going to try to represent. And if I disagree with my representative on whether or not there should be a dog park, I can't show up and have a voice about it. I can show up to them, but I can't show up and speak to the voting public. And being able, as Christy said, to show up and be part of the legislative body for a night or two and have an impact, it's a really, it's cool. It's one of the reasons I do this. And I just haven't heard yet a solution that feels more empowering. We have a problem getting people to town meeting. But I haven't heard a solution yet better than town meeting.
Let me go with Mr. Cole on
Sure.
the next.
So I'm not advocating for representative town meeting, but I think at the same time, it is also very clear that things that are passed at town meeting that have a much harder time at the ballot box. And therefore, that's a sign that there is something that is not quite properly democratic about town meeting. The fact that pot shops were legalized at the ballot box and then overwhelmingly voted against at town meeting is a sign that there is a disconnect between who shows up at town meeting and the actual will of the population. Personally, I think we're going to have a hard time getting the DPW building to pass because it's going to have to be a debt exclusion. And while it may pass at town meeting, does anyone in this room think it's a guaranteed surefire bet to pass at the ballot box? It was the same concern when we were doing these twin schools and the fire station. We knew that it would pass at town meeting. We all held our breath when it came to the ballot box. And that is clear proof that there is a mismatch. I'm not saying I have the result, I have the fix for it, but don't say that town meeting is perfectly representative of the will of the people. It probably gets it right most of the time, but it's not guaranteed to get it right because there are just 2% of the population. No matter what the statistics say, it's too easy to skew. It's way too easy to skew. 20 people would have made a difference on one of the big issues this last time around. 20. So it's not a guaranteed thing, and I would hesitate to call town meeting 100% democratic. It is a great solution. I love it too. I happen to be one of those people who's been to 16 town meetings in a row, and I'm not even at the average age of the people that go to town meetings. So I'm pretty happy about that. That said, don't try and tell me that 2% of the population or less than 2% of the population after the school budget's signed for and everyone exits the room is actually making the rational choice of how we spend the rest of the money the rest of the way. I'm not buying it.
So will you be,
Did not say that.
Well, you're the chair.
will you be drafting as
By all means,
citizens?
feel free to rebuttal what I just said. You felt that I put words in your mouth.
I did, well, you didn't really say who said it, but I didn't say that 2% was a statistically accurate representation. I said that a smaller sample size is representative. I didn't say 2% was representative, and I specifically said that the cross-section we have is not representative. So
So, Mr. Cole, I'd like to know if you'll be drafting a citizen's petition next year to make certain items such as debt exclusions, overrides, maybe any budgetary item over a certain dollar amount have to go to the ballot box.
I would love to see that.
Mr. Noonan.
Okay, so, the aforementioned committee on town meeting improvement did poll, we didn't get a lot of responses, we got a couple hundred as I recall. And we asked about representative town meeting and people were not in favor of it. We asked about Saturday sessions and people were definitely against that. I think equipped at one point, and somebody said, well, what about a representative town meeting? I said, I think we have one. The problem is ours are all self-appointed, not elected. We have 400, roughly, self-appointed representatives that show up every time. It's a complicated situation. The job is to be the legislative body of the town. And as such, as long as we're approving reasonable budgets for the town, the schools, and some of the other projects, it's doing its job. We have some close votes from time to time, but most of them aren't. Most of them are overwhelmingly one way or another. So I'd love to have more people come. If we even got up to 10%, I don't know where we'd hold it. You know, where would we hold it? I mean, we had that 1,200 person one that we were in the auditorium, in the gym, and everywhere else. There you go. Have to go to July.
Mr. Majors?
Yes, this thing here, it's the warrant itself. I think it needs to be published and put to bed at least a month before town meeting. Instead, it's always the last minute, and things are missing from it. There are corrections that need to be made. It needs to be distributed earlier. It's got to be more comprehensive. I really like the idea of having, if you published it early, you would have time to do a pro and a con. You know, the other special interests would have time to put some input into the warrant itself. They'd have a chance to review it and build their arguments, but I know our budget cycle is so tight that we always wind up doing this at the last minute, but it really needs to be published in a almost complete format, at least a month before town meeting, instead of a week.
Yeah. Well, I think as a finance committee, and as your current and outgoing chair, I feel a little guilty that I didn't probably schedule enough of the warrant representatives to come in and speak early enough, too, right? Sometimes that just doesn't.
There wasn't anyone there.
We probably could have gotten a little bit more done earlier, but you're right, it's a tight squeeze. It is a tight squeeze at the end, and then a lot of the information comes up on the day of the meeting. Mr. Wellinghoff.
Yeah, maybe one to you just on the finance committee messages. I like that. And I like how it's broad, and I think we do a good job with that. I'm not sure it would have as much of an impact as reading something, you know, in line with the actual warrant article itself. That would obviously be much more powerful. And again, I'm not advocating the finance committee write out a no or anything, but I'm just, again, thinking out loud if it's a not recommend. But I just wanted to second Jason's thoughts is, you know, the ballot box does typically have 2,000 people, and it's a commitment typically of 5 or 10 minutes out of someone's day at their convenience rather than 3 hours to wait for your agenda item that you may be most passionate about to show up. And I think we could all agree 2,000 is a better representation than 200 people. The bar can be a little higher for that, and you know, having a higher bar on some of the more impactful articles, I think would just do the town more justice and be more representative of what folks believe rather than a late second night scramble of 60 people who hung around to vote on the last 3 articles.
Ms. Anderson.
If you look at Boxborough's town warrant, they have a short paragraph by the board and a short paragraph by the finance committee. They have the broken out votes, not who did what, but 701 kind of thing. So they have a compact version of what you're talking about, kind of it's not a pro-con so much, but it's a brief foreshadowing.
Yeah, and then the owner of the article from the finance committee's perspective could articulate, you know, expand upon that into whatever degree is necessary. But it would at least give the town meeting members something to anchor on rather than this fragmented, you know, disparate bunch of folks chiming in at random intervals that, hey, here's the top 3 things the finance committee didn't like about this. And, you know, Dave or, you know, Adam or whoever can say, on point of number 1, you know, we crunched the numbers and this looks like this sort of impact to the average household tax bill. Oh, okay, well, I was already thinking about that and now you just added more information, you know, but yeah, great point.
I really like that suggestion, and I don't think it would be out of line to try to publish along with the recommendations that we've already voted that are already ready to be published, the reasons why we voted the way we did. Shouldn't take long to articulate that. All you have to do is watch the meeting on YouTube. And then, one thing that I really noticed this year, since we're kind of back in person and everybody in the same place, was how many publications were laying on the check-in tables both nights. We could potentially have a FinCom, publication on the night of, with any of those that would be missing, that we didn't get to before the actual warrant was published. So I don't know how we go about making that a process, whether we go to the select board to make a suggestion or ask the town manager, or whether it needs to be some type of a citizen petition. I'm not sure. Mr. Nin, did you have a thought on that?
There was a time in the not-too-distant past when we used to have a scorecard produced, and it was basically a rundown of the entire list of articles, usually just the money-related ones that contained both the select board recommendations and the FinCom recommendations, and totaled up everything and showed where the money was coming from. Whether it was coming from the general fund, from borrowing, from, in years past, it even had two sides and had some breakdown of both the town and the school budgets. It was stopped a couple of years ago simply because the warrant has progressed to the point where all that information was pretty much already in there. This goes back to the days when the only numerical table in the warrant used to be the ALG plan. So we used to have our own handout, and the town gladly produced it for us and put it on the table so that people could actually follow where the money was coming from, and it was kind of a shorthand view of what was going on. So there's been precedent for the town cooperating and producing a document for us, if you're so inclined.
Well, I think if the rest of the Finance Committee agrees that that's a good idea, I think that's something that we can pursue during this next year to try to make that a goal, to get not only the FinCom's reason for the way they voted published with each article in the warrant, but also the Select Board and also the Planning Board, which are the only, well, I noticed this year the Planning Board was removed from a lot of these. I'm not sure, in years past, they had to be one of the voting members, and I'm not sure
They're not always on.
why that was. But at any rate, other comments, follow-up to town meeting? Ms. Anderson?
That reminds me, the other thing that Boxborough had in their, for each warrant article, where applicable, they said how it was going to affect the taxes. Average single-family home would add this much to the tax bill, which I thought was also quite helpful.
Yeah, I agree, that would be nice. Ms. Russell, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, to that end of kind of explaining our position on articles, I would ask in the future that when we come around to discussing warrant articles, we don't vote any in a block, because we voted some in a block to recommend, and when they were spoken to at town meeting to recommend, it surprised some members, and then many of our members voted against the articles that we had recommended. So if we could just discuss each one and not vote any in a block, I think that that would clarify our messaging. You weren't there.
So it's
Sorry.
actually my fault.
Sorry, my
But
microphone
we did
was
get
off.
recommendations in all the articles.
Yeah, it had been my intent since back in June of last year not to vote a block on, especially on the citizen petitions, and to really make sure we discussed and make sure that we only voted on citizen petitions that were finance-related. But having COVID and being very cloudy, that's my fault that I didn't pipe up and say, hang on a second, don't vote these. I at least spoke up for one that I felt strongly about. I don't remember why it was. Okay, does that conclude our, can we call it a postmortem? I like that term. All right, so that concludes the discussion on town meeting. I think the best point that came out of that discussion was the idea of putting recommendations right in the warrant next year and put the reasons why we have the recommendations in the warrant. So let's move on to the ALG process. So last year, We voted at our very first meeting after town meeting what our recommendation to ALG was going to be, what we would accept, and what we would stand behind and recommend. And I think that was extremely helpful to the entire process last year. It certainly made the position for Mr. Noonan and myself extremely easy during the ALG process. We didn't really have to say a whole lot or give any reasons why we weren't saying a whole lot. So I wanted to talk about that this evening and see if we could do it again. And Mr. Noonan was kind enough to send out some of the numbers. I did a back-of-the-envelope calculations and kind of came up with all the same numbers that Mr. Noonan came up with. Last year, what we voted, we had said that we would not support spending of free cash below 3%, and we had said that we would not support an override. Those were the only two things that we said to ALG all year last year. So this year, what do we want to say to ALG? And I think I'll start the discussion by saying, you know, we currently have an ALG deficit planned of a little less than 1.9 million. We have receipts coming in that are higher than expected. I believe that the school quarterly report also showed receipts higher than they expected. We can expect some turnbacks after the year. And we have more than enough money in the stabilization fund and the enterprise funds to cover what the current deficit is budgeted to be. And so with that note, I would say that I think in the past, any deficit or any, leftovers have been sort of split, I guess, between the school district and the town on a 2/3, 1/3 basis, give or take. So that gives us approximately 1.27 million to ABRSD and approximately $630,000 to Acton to cover that deficit. And so I will open it up to discussion from the group about how we want to make recommendations and what kind of motions we want to make this evening. So who would like to speak to this? Mr. Noonan.
Well, let me just go through what I sent out, because I told you not to reply. The current ALG plan, which I will preface by saying does not get a lot of attention spent to it in the ALG process. Everything gets focused on the one budget year, and the other years are more of a mechanical extension. But what it calls for is a 2.2% increase in revenue and a 3.8% increase in spending, which is not going to work. So as Adam said, it's $1,877,000 of a deficit, and that includes using $1 million in free cash from reserves. So where the spending breaks out is interesting. The municipal budget is actually up 2.7% all in, but the school assessment is up 3.9%. And Minuteman is up 19%. I don't know what we can do about Minuteman. I'll be happy if the town wants to live with 2.7%. 3.9% strikes me as high for the school assessment because the last couple of years have been more like 3 or a little over. But the 1.877, yeah, local receipts are going to be more than what's in the budget because we're practically at that level now through 3 quarters. And typically the way that we budget local receipts is looking backwards, not forward. So there's a good chance we'll exceed that by probably 350,000. New growth in this plan is 700,000, where it's been 900,000 or $1 million a couple of years before. So is that really happening? Other potential sources to cut down on that deficit would be if the turnbacks exceed $1 million, because that's the number that's cranked into the plan. And we won't know until probably September if they do or they don't. There's the overlay reserve, which is its typical $700,000 deduction. It's usually that, but some years it's been adjusted one way or the other to reflect what the assessors believe. Reclaiming subsidies from enterprise funds is maybe a dry hole. I was looking at what the fund balances were on the ones that have been subsidized, which is ambulance, transfer, transportation, one more. And there's just not that much there. You can reclaim general fund subsidies to enterprise funds that have happened in the past, if they have the money to pay you back.
Which unfortunately they do not.
And the other item is unspent warrant articles. Warrant articles have a life of 3 years. If it hasn't been spent or started to be spent, it should flow back into free cash. So my first recommendation is to ask for all those things to be reviewed as soon as possible to see how big the deficit actually is. My gut feel was that, yeah, we should be able to say no operating override should be necessary. But too little data at the moment. But it's actually a smaller deficit than we started this year with. It was 2.2, I think, when we started this year.
Ms. Anderson?
The 3.9% increase in the ABRSD assessment is greater than the historically projected 3.75%. Do we know the basis for that? So maybe this is involving the new contract?
Could be. Ms. Russell?
Sure, I mean, the new contract isn't any bigger than the last contract, at least not in the first year. To my recollection, I don't think it is even for the full 3 years. If we're going to parse this out in a way and say, 1/3 town, 2/3 school, I wouldn't mind figuring out what percentage is Minuteman and at least sending them a request and saying, hey, we're asking the town to cut from their projection this amount so that we can afford it, and from the schools, and you're a school, and we need you to pay more attention to your budget.
Comments down on this end?
I think that's really fair, considering how much the increase has been. I mean, I think we were discussing this, I think at town meeting, last year we had such a huge outcry over the school budgets, and this year, absolutely nothing, in spite of the fact that the Minuteman budget actually went up quite a bit. So if it continues to go up at that rate, obviously that's going to be a deal breaker when we're trying to cut down the rest of our budgets. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things I wanted to address in this discussion is I think that is another item that even though it's not ALG specific, I think we should also come up with a recommendation for Minuteman, make a motion, vote on it, and tomorrow morning, send it off to them. Let me actually get Mr. Borden.
Can I just real quick clarify?
Oh, sorry,
Just
go
to
ahead.
clarify
Go
a
ahead.
point, that the majority of this incredible increase is a student population-based increase. So to that effect, I'm not sure how much this number, if they reduce their overall budget, how much that number goes down. But that's where the majority of the grand increase comes from. But that doesn't mean we don't still have cause to say it's still too much per student. Do you really need to be spending this much per student and thus charging us that much? So.
Sorry, I'll interrupt before I let you speak, Roland. Yeah, so my thought on that was that we would draft a statement, something to the effect that we won't accept a Minuteman operating budget that increases more than 3%. And then our student increases and the debt exclusions, I suppose, would be over that. But we at least want to see their operating budget not exceeding some number. And I'm not saying it's 3%, but it has to be something. So let me go with Mr. Borden.
So there was one individual who got up and spoke in opposition at town meeting on the Minuteman budget. And Minuteman is unique, right? Because it has different expenses than a regular school district would because of the equipment and 2 sets of teachers, et cetera, because of the specialties. So, I mean, that's something to keep in mind, but I like the idea that you're going to say, hey, keep your operating budget, and we're not talking about the debt exclusion and that, and the per pupil additions, because we've been sending more students there. I think that's a good message to send. Because we're asking that of our own school district, and we're asking that of our town. Well, they should be considered with that, too.
Ms. Anderson? Mr. Cole?
Sorry, I believe their budget was only a 4.5% increase. Christine's trying to find it. So it might not be as far off as, we're looking at it and going 28%, that's ridiculous. Well, as Christine pointed out, that's because of student population.
It's always student
That's-
enrollment, yeah.
So we might not get as much of a change as we'd hope, but I think we need to.
Well, the important thing is that the important thing is that we get them to start controlling their operating expenses in some way, shape, or form. I mean, the same way that ABRSD had to come through and make cuts in the last 2 years. We can't be watching our own school district making cuts while our sister, school district is growing at a great rate. So comments down on this end? More comments this way. Mr. Cole?
I want to change topics slightly. If there's anything else on Minuteman, please let that finish.
Yeah, as long as it's ALG or Minuteman related, please feel free.
It's ALG related, it's not
Yep.
Minuteman related. I think going and saying 3% floor and no override, well, I think those are two very valid and valuable points. I also would like us to say something on the topic of capital. Because if we do go forward with a $35 to $50 million building, then our average single-family tax rate is about to balloon. I would love to do the numbers on this, but I believe, when you take the $120 million that was the new boardwalk school, and you take out the MSB reimbursement, which was 31%, and you take out the Boxborough responsibility, which is 15%, we're down to 76 million, which we're on the hook for at 2.15. If we end up having a 40, 45, stick with a best case number of $35 million building at an interest rate that is closer to 6, we're going to be spending almost as much on that DPW building as we spent on the boardwalk school. And that, I believe, had a $880 per year impact on this average single-family tax rate. So before we just throw in our hat on keep the reserve floor and keep away from an override, I think we need to pay attention to the fact that our average single tax rate could potentially no longer be the 16th in the state, it could be higher. And I would like us, before we vote on this tonight, I'd like us to take at least one meeting or two, no more than two, because I like what you said about getting in front of ALG as early as possible. But I think if we don't pay attention to capital, it's a sneaky way for us to find ourselves holding a bag that we're not prepared to hold.
Agreed. So on that, do we want to make any motions and votes tonight, or do we want to wait until next meeting?
Next meeting.
Okay. Any other comments on the ALG process? Let's move along. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I've been loath to say this. I cannot imagine how we're going the next 3 to 5 years without having an override. And I would love to know from people who've been around this block more, how the amount is considered, at what point in the process one decides to do it. I don't see the school cutting their budget a whole lot more next year. So I'm really curious at what point you decide to have the override. Assumingly, you don't want to have to keep doing rolling overrides, so you jump ahead some percent.
I'm going to jump in, Mr. Noon. Mr. Noon has a very good answer for you, but I first want to jump in with my thought on that question, which was one of the things that I, would recommend in the ALG process if we felt we were facing an override, which is that if we were going to face a one-year override, we'd come up with some specific amount and say, we'll support this amount, we won't support more, and we need some justification for that. If it's going to be an override large enough so that it can last many years, I think it's really important that the Finance Committee sits down with their pencils and does the hard math to figure out how long will that last? And we will only recommend it basis some sort of contract with each of the budgeting parties that they're going to stick to an amount each year until they get to the end of that and can never go over those amounts in those years. And I think if you don't do that, as soon as you've raised that tax levy, there's the risk that the budgeting entities just start spending crazily. So, Mr. Noon, I'm sorry. Please go ahead with your answer to her question.
3 years. The way it was done in the past is we'd calculate, estimate what we would need to cover 3 years before asking for potentially another override. Because the politics of asking for one every year just doesn't work. There'll be override fatigue after the first year. You never get to the third year. So it was generally always planned to be 3 years. It had to be constructed such that both the town and the schools showed the need. It couldn't be one side or the other. So it's not an easy exercise to do. But there has to be something needed by both sides. And you don't do a 1 year at a time override.
Mr. Cole.
I would also suggest that before we start entertaining an override, and I don't think we have to worry about it this year, because what I just saw today is $400,000 to $500,000 to the upside on excise, maybe some other money elsewhere. We're probably not in any jeopardy. But I would say that before we as a committee even contemplate entertaining an override, that we have allowed for some of the stopgaps to be taken off. We have a $2 million stabilization fund. We have a 3% floor. We have an overlay account that we look at occasionally and we keep an eye on, but we don't actually overly protect or overly go after. We're kind of happy when we remember to use it every couple of years. I think, so this year we're saying don't go below 3%. Some number of years from now, we might end up saying we're prepared to go to 1% in preparation to stave off override one more year, because I don't ever want to stand up in front of the town and say we're asking for an override, but we got $6 to $10 million if you add up all the enterprise funds, the stabilization fund, E&D, and everything else. I think that's a terrible idea. So this year I would say I still don't want to go below 3%, our 3% floor. I don't want to entertain an override this year. I want us to have a greater, deeper conversation about exactly where we want our average single-family tax bill to be. But in 2, 3, 4, hopefully 10 years, we have to have a conversation of, okay, we're going to ride the razor's edge for 1 year to prove that we really need to get there.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Cole's point that especially while the school's E&D is below 3%, we do not want the town's free cash to fall below 3%, because God forbid if the school had an emergency, somebody would need to cover the costs. So going once, going twice, do we want to make any motions tonight? Oh, who is it? Mr. Willinghoff. Was it an ALG comment? Feel free. Go ahead.
Just to Jason's point on the extra money, I was curious. I know we voted through one of the federal pieces of legislation, the town got a lot of money. It was like 7 to 8 million, high 7 millions. And I couldn't remember if we allocated part of that to PFAS treatment at the water district.
We did some, it wasn't huge.
Are you referring to the ARPA?
Yeah, our
ARPA money.
Yeah.
Was it like $500,000?
I want to say it was somewhere between 750 and 1.5 that we,
I don't think it's that high.
was it only 500,000?
Oh,
Far less than they asked for.
No, I'm sure you saw the announcement from a couple of weeks ago, just the money that the Acton Water District's getting for PFAS treatment. I mean, at least the article that I had read was like upwards of $15 million.
So should we ask for some back?
Well, I'm just thinking out loud, but, and I don't know what the needs are. I don't think they were to that degree, but I just don't recall off the top of my head. But there could be money that could be allocated also to this effort.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that between stabilization, if you took some of the operating items that could be charged to the specific enterprise funds appropriately, and then also look at, the turnbacks plus the unspent warrant articles plus the overlay, doesn't seem like we'll really have a lot of trouble covering the 2025 budget. So on that, do we want to make a motion this evening for at least the free cash and the same procedure as last year?
I would not. I would like us to wrap in capital.
Okay. We will postpone that until next meeting. And with that, let's move on to, go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
For the sake of actually coming to next meeting with that information, Jason, what exactly do you have in mind, and can we assign it to someone?
So I would like us every year in our POV, we have the debt slide. I'd like us to review that debt slide and then make a projection for what happens at 35, 40, and 50 million. And then see what that does to average single-family tax bill. And sort of set that as, or have a conversation with that. Are we comfortable with that as our cap for the year?
You're talking about what would it add to annual debt service if we took out
What would
a bond?
What would it
of those
add to
sizes?
debt service, which would, how exactly would that, take that number and add it with our regular ALG expectation? What would that do to average single-family tax bill? And then let's take a look at that number before we decide to sign off on what we're going to do for ALG.
35, 40, 45, 40.
And I can do a fair chunk of that. Can need your raw data from last year.
If you give it to me, I can prep the slides.
Done.
Okay. And with that, I think the next item on our agenda is to talk about Finance Committee leadership. So I will take nominations for chair, vice chair, and clerk for next year.
Move to elect Christy Anderson as chair, Jason Cole as vice chair, and Isha Gangoli as clerk.
Second.
And discussion.
You should ask for other nominations.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any other nominations?
There never are.
I didn't think there would be. All right. Any discussion on that? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank you all. The last few months were extreme, to say the least, between all the other things I have going on, plus preparing for things that I had never done before. And all of you who have helped me and who got me through especially the tough bits here at the end, I really appreciate it. There were a lot of phone calls to Mr. Noon. He probably felt like he was my babysitter there for a while, so I do appreciate that. Okay, let's see, what is it? Oh, it's the entering Acton town sign on a glass, and there's probably something in here to put in the.
No, it's not allowed.
So I'll open that later? Okay. All right, thank you all very much. Very kind, appreciate that. All right, so on that note, do I turn it over to Christy at this point?
Yes.
Christy, you get to announce our next agenda item. The next item on the agenda is a update on the River Street Dam from Mr. Martin.
Mr. Martin, would you please come talk to us about the River Street Dam?
Hello, I'm happy to do this in whatever detail you guys would like, I have a slideshow which is several months old, but it's basically current, and I'll jump around in this presentation because we don't need to do the whole thing. The project is currently out to bid. A few months back, the town hired a construction manager for the project. Their estimates for what it would cost in today's bidding environment, which is not as good as it was a year and a half ago, is that we may not have enough money. And so we structured the bid with a base bid and 2 ad alternates, trying to structure it such that the things in the ad alternates were the easier things to come back and add later if we wanted to do that. So the base bid includes the dam removal, which we're required to do, and then all the earth movement for the park and basically setting up the park, with basic lawns and that kind of thing. And then there's a one ad alternate that includes some of the things for moving some of the stone around because some of the stone is being used in the park. And then finally, the amenities for the park. We don't know where those bids are going to be until later this week. And so we don't know the extent of whether we have a problem or not until those bids are in. These numbers on the screen were the estimates of what things would cost based on the construction manager's estimates of the bid documents, and they're costing it out. So we'll have to see what we have. I think we have close between the dam and seawall grant, which is the biggest piece of this, and other things. We have close to $1.88 million available. So we're guessing that we have a 6-figure problem. Whether it's $100,000 to $300,000, we don't know, and we'll know. And if Christie wants me to come back and report in June, I can do that. So this is now behind a little bit. We had hoped to go begin construction actually next month, but we're missing one permit, and so I will go up here. Since this slide was made, the Chapter 91 waterways license has been issued, so we're all set there. The 404 permit from the Army Corps, which includes them signing off on the historic agreement, which has been in process for years, is being held up. So the 404 requires the Massachusetts Historical Commission to agree, and the Massachusetts Historical Commission is relying on the Acton Historical Commission for input to that. There is a memorandum of agreement that's been signed by the Acton Historical Commission and the Massachusetts Historical Commission that was submitted as part of the permit request. But we're hearing that the Army Corps may want to edit that, which is odd since we used a template from the Army Corps to create that document. So I don't know when that will be resolved. Hopefully it doesn't go off the rails such that we can still hit this construction season. So that's my basic, project report in terms of costs and where the project is and everything. If the committee would like a review of what the park design looks like, I can do that as well.
Yes, please.
Oops. So this is what the park design currently looks like. It's actually a really cool little park. It's not a very big area, but it has a lot of interesting features. So near point one on this diagram, some stone taken from the dam when it's demolished is used to outline the mill buildings that were originally on the site. And inside those, that outline, so that's a really low wall, something less than a foot, are some historical kiosks that have plaques and pictures and history in them, and some maybe other amenities like a bench. Over at area 3 on this map, there's part of the dam would be, the old dam would be turned into an overlook. So one of the walkways would lead up there, and there'd be a section of dam that remains and a railing around it, and so you could go up there and look at the impoundment on your right if you're facing the dead end or facing down on this. See the impoundment on your right or the park on your left. The other thing at point 5 is some of the stone from the dam is used to make a little bit of an amphitheater built into the slope there of the park as you head up out of the river, the floodplain, and up towards the higher elevation on River Street. So that's also kind of cool. You can, and finally, just above the number 4 is the tail race. Let me take my cursor and hopefully you can see this. This is the old tail race. It wouldn't have water in it anymore because, as you can see from the position of the river in this diagram, the river is no longer high enough to have water go down the tail race. And so the tail race is being sealed, and any historic artifacts in there are sealed in place, which is a legitimate way of preservation. And then the outline of the tail race will be a little bit of a walkway. And so that's also kind of cool. And then you'll be able to approach at a couple different areas, approach the Fort Pond Brook itself. You'll be able to fish in Fort Pond Brook if you want to do that. It's actually stocked. So that's the nature of things. I can, on the left, the diagram number 2 on this, that's kind of a conceptual look of what that overlook would look like with that bit of dam remaining. And the brick structure that's on the right-hand side of that is a wheelhouse or control house for the dam. It's not structurally sound, and so the brick at the upper levels is just going to be removed until it becomes structurally sound at the bottom. And then on diagram 6 here, there's an example. This is an example from another park as to what the amphitheater kind of thing would look like. The one in this park would be a little bit smaller than what's pictured here. So that's basically everything. The salt shed that's on the left here has already been demolished. And the 1950s era building will be demolished as part of the overall dam removal project. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Adam.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I'm really surprised by the cost of the actual construction of taking the dam down. You drive by and look at that thing, and it looks like I could probably do it with a sledgehammer, but I know there's a lot more involved in that. But I was very intrigued by the list of permits. Could you go back to the slide with the list of permits? I would think you'd need like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 permits. How many is that? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so there's only 2 holding the process up right now, but nothing can be done until both of those permits are approved, correct?
We can't break ground, right? So it is out to bid. And therefore, if we get this, the next day, the contractor could break ground.
Okay. And are any of the other permits, do they have expiration dates? Or are they good once they're good?
Some of them do have expiration dates. We're tracking it. The reason I was late for this meeting is I was just presenting to the HDC for the second to the last one here, which expires June 2nd, 2023. And we would have been fine had we gotten this permit and gone to bid a month ago. We would have broken ground by June 2nd, 2023. But now we won't be doing that. And so I asked the HDC to extend it, and they approved that.
Wonderful. And then are we on the hook for soil remediation in this project?
So one of the things that we did that came up during the value engineering exercises is to leave the soil on the site and plan the park area, the grades in the park area to keep the soil on the site. Because there's just costs in removing it, not only to truck it, but to test it. And so even though there has been exploratory diggings in a number of places in the park and no contaminated soil has been found anywhere in the park, when it's removed, it has to be tested again. Because if you take it to a landfill and you dump it and it has something in it, maybe it's not exactly where the test pits were dug and things, so it has to be tested again.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a risk to that, and so most of the soil's remaining on site.
So the plan that we have doesn't involve any dredging of the soil and moving it at all then? It's just gonna let it wash downstream?
That's correct, and all the major soil movement is in the base bid, and so one of the things that we're required to do as part of the removing the ban is to, and one of the reasons why it's expensive to remove the dam, is that we have to reconstruct the floodplain in a natural-esque environment, the way it could have evolved had the dam not been there. And that involves a lot of movement of material, and as part of the base bid also will be all the movement of material required for the park. So when the park pieces get done, the really heavy machinery doesn't need to be used. Like it'd be a bobcat or something to level the walkways and stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, thank you very much. All right, next item is committee reports. Does anyone have anything they would like to report? Christine?
At this point in time, the superintendent for the Minuteman School District is on administrative leave pending an investigation by the school committee. And the school committee is retaining a lawyer for this process. About a month ago, it came to light that the superintendent had decided not to renew the contract for Principal Clement, who's been with Minuteman for quite a long time. There was a lot of outcry by the student population, by parents, by teachers and administration. Obviously, Mr. Clement cannot, and the superintendent cannot really comment on why that decision not to renew his contract. The general sense is that their priorities did not align going forward. Since then, a letter from Mr. Clement to the school committee has been made public in which it is alleged that the superintendent, and again, this is alleged by Mr. Clement and is being investigated. So I don't want to say that any of this is, fact, but it is alleged that she has made students and staff uncomfortable in rubbing their shoulders unsolicited, that she sat in uninvited on a therapy session between a student and a therapist at the school, and that she reached out to administrators on leave and demanded that they work, even though they were on vacation time, and other incidences that the staff in general have found unfavorable, micromanagement, and other things. So again, this is Mr. Clement's statement to the school committee. The school committee met in executive session last week, and based on that discussion, have put her, for the moment, on administrative leave. Mr. Clement has been on leave, personal leave, I would say, from Minuteman since finding out that his contract was not to be renewed. So financially, this doesn't affect us at all at the moment, but there's upheaval at one of our schools, and this is where it is at the moment. So there is a assistant superintendent and an assistant principal, and the school is functioning as normal as it can for now.
Any questions or comments? All right, any other liaison reports? No. Adam?
I forgot to put it on the agenda to talk about liaison assignments, but can I please request to be forgiven my role as the select board liaison, at least for a year? Not that I don't like going and I don't appreciate it, I just need a break from feeling like I have obligations. But we can discuss that at the next meeting.
Yes, we will discuss that at the next meeting. Does anyone have any more comments or reports from their current? All right, next item is upcoming scheduled meetings. I have a question, first of all, for our outgoing chair. When is the next ALG meeting?
I believe we said we were going to meet in either June or July. Let me see if we put it in the calendar. There is nothing on my calendar, so I can't specifically recall. I just recall everybody saying that they didn't feel that they needed to meet until at least July.
They say that every year.
Yep.
Every year that I've been involved, I argue that it needs to happen
Yep.
as soon as possible.
So there is nothing on my calendar, and I apologize that I don't specifically
What was the
recall.
regular schedule? Third Thursday or something?
It was typically third Thursdays, and we've been meeting at noon, and it has remained a Zoom meeting.
That would put the next third Thursday at June 15th. And our next FinCom meeting, incredibly, would occur on June 13th. Do we want to meet before then, or do we think we can cover what we need to do our opening? We could meet in 2 weeks on the 30th, if you'd like, which would give us another 2 weeks before the 13th.
Do we have the room reserved?
No,
We only have the room reserved on the second and fourth Tuesdays through the rest of the year.
it just happens to be a big gap between the second and fourth coming up.
And the 4th is next week, and that's probably too early. So we'll have to find.
Well, and I had already given up our reservation for the 23rd.
Yes.
Yep, that's fine. So we'll have to find something for the 30th.
Does that work for people to meet on the 30th? The 30th of May. That is the Tuesday after Memorial Day. Yes? Okay, I will find us a room.
There's probably a good chance you can get this room. It's been generally reserved for the Board of Health, and they've also been meeting via Zoom, but obviously you'll ask and you'll get the answer.
1 second. Any other FinCom business? I did send out a version of minutes for us to review in response to some questions from Roland. The reason that articles appear multiple times is they appear once per motion. So it says what the article number, motion, and whether that passed, which is why there was also one motion that you thought we hadn't recommended. The votes do not recommend passed. So you have to read it. Yeah, I think, yes, definitely fix that. So fixing the misspelling of Mr. Borden's name is the only correction I've heard of. For that, unless anyone has any others, I would be happy to accept a motion.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
1 second. I'm not going to demand that Isha write this one yet.
She might already be on
Are you already on it?
No.
All right. You need to write down the motion. Yeah. And who firsted and seconded? Steve made the motion? Christine? Sure. As the closest voice I heard, seconded. Roland is also good for seconding. Because we are not having anyone remote, we can just do this as a vote. It doesn't need to be roll call. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Does anyone have any other business? Adam?
I'd like to ask if Mr. Martin could forward the dam slideshow to our new clerk, and I will teach you how to put those on the DocuShare, even though it should be you teaching, but I've been putting everything on the DocuShare this year. I've been doing it for 3 years. I love it. But I'm going to pass it on now.
All right.
Move we adjourn?
Second.
No, that's,
Too late.
Steve.
Can't debate it.
Steve jumped to it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, thank you. Good night, everyone.
You're